guys want to show the other screen? Oh, there you go. So I want to show little snippet, a little segment of who we are. So hi, my name is Gigi Hernandez. I'm from Inside Schools Plus. I'm the Spanish project lead, and I also handle partnerships here. And here we'll be conversing with EdReports, the Chief Strategy Officer here. I believe you will see her on the screen is Lauren Weiskirk, along with Courtney Allison. I don't know if you guys want to present yourself.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Lauren. I am going to be leading our webinar today. As you can see, I'm a former New York City Department of Ed employee, parent of 2 preschoolers, and proud nerd, particularly around curriculum materials. And so we'll be sharing, you'll get to know me and more about our work here at EdReports more during this webinar. I'm joined by my colleague, Courtney. Courtney, could you please say hi?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. I'm broadcasting live from Lower Manhattan. And so you'll learn a little bit more about me later, but really happy to be here. And I started my education career as a New York City public school teacher in middle school mathematics during a curriculum adoption. So really have maintained that love of high quality instructional materials, and I'm really excited to talk to you all today.
Yeah, and you'll get to hear more about Courtney, her journey, and her journey as a parent in New York City schools a little bit later on in today's presentation. So here's what's on tap for today. We're going to talk briefly about the New York City's K-12 education context, how it relates to materials, talk more about why instructional materials matter, who we are at EdReports, and how you can use our resources as members of the community and as families, and how families can join the instructional materials conversations. Then we're going to end with some time for some Q&A. So if you have questions, please add them to the chat. EdReports and Inside Schools teams will be checking the chat, answering some of them live, holding some of them for discussion at the end. So we're going to start. And Gigi, do you have the quiz ready? The poll? There it is. Thank you. We're going to start just to get a little bit of an understanding of where y'all are coming from and what's your, what's our starting point? This will help us with the conversation. First question, what's your knowledge of your school's instructional materials? 1, I have no idea. 2, 5, I know everything about them and I support my child in using them. Second question, how well do you know how decisions about instructional materials are made? 1, again, I have no idea. 5, I know every step and have participated before.
We're almost at completion. So I want to give you guys a couple more seconds, just because we have a lot to cover today. No need to rush. I'm so sorry. Couple more seconds. Okay, let me end the poll. Not sure if you guys see the photo on your screens. If you don't, just read them out loud. So for the first question we asked, what's your knowledge of your child's instructional materials? And if you didn't get a chance to put in the poll, you can write it in the chat. And I'm pretty sure, let me see if you guys have questions. The chat. Majority of the people are around 2. And we see it's a sliding scale from like 1 who have no idea, about like 20% said they have no idea, followed by moderately, they have somewhat, and then only 2 participants said, I know the materials and have supported my child with them. And then the second question we have, how well do you know how decisions about instructional materials are made. Majority of attendees said, I have no idea.
Thank you for sharing. I would say that very much tracks, not just what we see in New York City, but what we see across the country. And so that's one of the reasons we at EdReports, and we're a group whose our whole mission is around supporting getting great high quality instructional materials into classrooms and into teachers and students' hands. Like this exactly here is why we were so excited to work with Inside Schools today and get a chance to present for some more families and community members, then also hear back from you. Thank you. So, all right, curriculum. You're going to hear me say curriculum, you're going to hear me say instruction and materials. At the end of the day, this is what it is defined as for the New York City Department of Education context. It's a list of content topics, a scope and sequence, and what students are expected to know and be able to do after studying each topic. Basically, right? It's the worksheets if your child has worksheets, or the textbook if your child has textbooks, or it's the materials that are available through an online system, because we know increasingly students are also getting curriculum and access to curriculum through tablets, through your computer and the like. So it's all the content. So why do we care so much about this? Why do we hope that you all will care so much about this too? Through our work, we know that materials matter a lot. The quality of the content that students get access to has a huge impact on their ability to graduate high school, college, and career ready. What we talk a lot about is this idea of this instructional core, which is a foundation for learning. Let me just show you a picture of that. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we've got these three components in every classroom. You have the students, right? You have the teacher, and then you have the content through which they interact. And so this content becomes really, really important because it drives the majority of what teachers bring into the classroom every day, and the majority of the ways that your student is going to be engaging with the activities, the readings, the units, the assessments, all of that around the knowledge and skills they need to be at grade level and ready for increasingly progressively challenging work. One of the most, I think, interesting things about high quality instructional materials is that they don't necessarily cost more. So as at EdReports, we've reviewed over 90% of all of the materials that are for sale or available for free online in the market. And there is not a difference between, it's not cost prohibitive. Schools and districts are able to find high quality materials at every price point. And also those materials that are sometimes the most expensive aren't necessarily filled with better content, better lessons, better activities. Teachers know that this is a really, really important aspect of their jobs and of the student's education experience. So this is from a survey from a few years ago, and teachers were asked, select all that apply. What are the funding priorities? If you could put your money down anywhere, where would you hope your school or district would spend additional funds? And you can see the top one, tied with additional staff, is for high quality instructional materials and textbooks. It's even higher than you see higher salaries, for example. So teachers are really clear in saying this is a critical part and this is how a resource they need. Why? Because if you don't have it, it is the job of a teacher becomes so difficult. We see teachers spending 7 to 12 hours per week in addition to their time in classrooms with students, in addition to their teacher team meetings, in addition to their work in the classroom every day, searching for or creating their own materials. When does that happen? It happens at nights. It happens on Saturdays and Sundays. Like, our teachers are spending a lot of time when they don't have this great core curriculum in order to figure out what they're going to bring to the class the next day, the next week. So how do they do it? 96% of teachers use Google to find lessons and materials, and 75% go to Pinterest. I don't know about you, but I can get into what I call a Google hole. I start searching. Most recently, I've been on the search for like the perfect pair of jeans. I start searching and I type something like great jeans for women into my Google, search box. And then I keep going and I click and I check something out, and I've been taken to a wrong path. Okay, now I'm going down a new path. 2 hours, 3 hours later, I see you, Jessica. 2 hours, 3 hours later, I don't even know that I've found a pair of jeans. I might have actually just abandoned the entire process and ended up with a t-shirt. But what we're saying is, because there are so many options, the internet is not a very efficient or effective way for people to be searching. And when you're talking about teachers searching for instructional materials, there are thousands and thousands of sites and links and resources out there. And it takes up, as you see on this slide, 7 to 12 hours. This can have a huge impact, particularly when we think about equity. So a study from TNTP, a national nonprofit that looked across schools in multiple states, saw that on average, students are, of the 720 hours of instructional time, 581 are on assignments that aren't high quality. That's like 3/4 of the time they're spending on assignments that aren't high quality. And this is particularly significant and particularly pronounced in for students of color and students experiencing poverty. Increasing the quality of curriculum is a huge lever for increasing equity. Because the consequences keep going after high school graduation. So one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this is because we're making a promise to our children, right? That if you go to, you start in kindergarten, you end in grade 12, you'll be ready for college or careers. What we're finding is that 40% of college students are taking remedial courses when they enter college, because they are filling gaps in their skills or knowledge that colleges have been told, like that they've been told they're ready for in college, but then colleges are like, no, that they aren't ready for college level work. These remedial classes cost money, and usually students don't get any credit for it. So now you're spending your student aid money and you're spending your tuition money on classes and that you already as a student were told you're ready to take, like, and you're not getting any credit. That costs families and students about $1.5 billion a year. And that's if you go the college route. We also hear from businesses and for people in careers that students who go straight from 12th grade into careers similarly are missing a lot of skills and gaps that they would have expected would already be in place in order to really be set up for success. Okay, so I've talked a lot about why it's important. Let me share with you a resource that our organization puts out, and then we'll talk a little bit more about how families can get involved in the materials conversation. So our whole theory of action here at EdReports is that if we provide information about which material, about how well materials meet characteristics of being high quality, that then districts, states, schools will demand high quality instructional materials. leading the market, leading the publishers and the producers of curriculum to improve what they're producing, and then better outcomes for all students. Think of us kind of like a Consumer Reports or a Wirecutter, except for we are both, our reports are free and available on our website. No subscription needed to access all of the information. You can go on our site, read free reviews. We have a newsletter. We're all over Twitter and Facebook. So there are ways to stay engaged with us after the conversation today and also be tapped into the conversation that's happening nationally around the quality of instructional materials and their importance. When you go to our website, the first thing that you can see, thank you for putting that in the chat, Gigi. The first thing that you'll see is a place where you can search by publisher, by subject, by grade level. You can also just skim through multiple reports that have been published. The next level down is for each material, each set of materials that we've reviewed. You can get like a snapshot view that shows how well materials did based on the reviews. So for example, the one we're looking at right now, you see a lot of green dots. You also see the score in between, like in the center of the green dot, that like that material got 34 out of 34 points. And then if you want to keep digging, the next thing you can do is click through and see a bunch of detailed evidence for what our educator reviewers saw and what they highlighted as like, oh, this is getting a meets expectations. This is getting a 4 out of 4. Here's why. And it gives it down to the unit and lesson level. So it's also, I've heard from a lot of parents, this is a helpful way to get to understand the materials at a high level and be like, oh, okay. So if I look at unit 1 or lesson 1, here's what this report is saying is really good about it. So now if I open up my child's textbook, I have a different way to engage with that content and know why it's, considered to be good. There's some good news. The availability of high quality materials is going up and up and up. So when we first launched in 2015, we only found one set of materials that were that met the criteria. Now, in going out through 2021, we're up to 44% of the materials that are being marketed and sold are high quality and 51% in ELA. So there are good materials out there. A challenge is they still aren't being used. Now, this could be because their districts are in the middle of new purchasing decisions. They need to get better materials in the hands of teachers. It could also be a disconnect between the quality materials are also like the professional learning that teachers are getting. So is it a supportive environment that that supports teachers not just to have something really strong in their classroom, but also know how to use it? All right. So that is a little bit about EdReports, the market, why materials matter. Now let's pivot more into thinking about instructional material, how families can enter and engage in the instructional materials conversation. Our first set of recommendations is that first bullet, that first poll that we answered, right? Know what materials are available to your child. You can physically open up a backpack and get a sense of what those materials are. You can also look on their tablet screen. One thing that I would say you should predict is that there will be different sources. Back to that 7 to 12 hours a week teachers are spending sourcing materials. Like you might see worksheets or you might see printouts that don't necessarily come from the same materials like as the primary source that you see on the tablet or you have in the textbook. That is something, again, we're just inventorying at this place, not making judgments, but the place to start is knowing what materials are available. Then ask a couple of questions. First, this is my favorite tip. Check the textbook publication date. We still see across the country so many textbooks from like a social studies textbook from the 90s still in use. Guess what? A lot of history has happened since 1990. And if your textbook still has a 1990 copyright, what is your child missing out on, right? Also, it's really interesting to see, that's also gets to the printout version. Check what the printouts look like too. You can also usually see a copyright on that year. Then come on over to EdReports. You can type it in or do the scrolls and the search that I showed you earlier and see what our educator reviewers said, where the strengths of those materials are and where there are gaps. And then third, find out if the materials have family supports built into them. So some materials are increasingly providing ways for families to engage directly with the content. At the beginning of the pandemic, we did a review of all of the materials who were rated highly on our site and got more information about the technology supports and the access for families. I'm going to ask one of my EdReports colleagues to put that link into the chat too. That's another place where you can look and understand like how you can engage more with the content that your child is learning. Next, engage with your child's teacher about instructional materials. And this is like every teacher I talk to is excited to partner with families. And having these questions to lead your conversation would be really helpful. What do you think of the materials? What do you like about them? What could be improved? Is the curriculum giving teachers what they need to help all students succeed? So it's really engaging with the teacher as a professional and a partner so that you can better understand the choices he or she is making throughout the day, and also get a better understanding of if, let's say, for example, the materials in use aren't very high quality, you could understand and become a better ally to support your teachers in getting the resources they need. Finally, and I alluded to this on a previous slide about getting to use, you can ask if the teachers are getting access to great professional learning. It is not enough to simply, for a district or a school to simply purchase new materials and drop them off into a classroom and then have them be used. This is a critical part of the teacher experience and is one that is across the country very underutilized. We find that the majority of teachers across the country get fewer than 5 hours per year of learning and professional development on their curriculum. That's not nearly enough in order to understand the content, think about all of the ways to adapt that content and adapt the lessons for the students who are in the classroom, right? Curriculum is not a script. You don't just pick it up, start reading and hope that it gets into students' brains and that they gain the skills. This is, the learning and the engagement with curriculum is a really critical way so that teachers are adapting it and making sure that the students are having the experience that it's made for them and fits where they are and helps push them forward. With that, I'm going to invite my colleague Courtney to share a little bit more about her family's journey through the, here's the list of resources. It'll be available to you. Her family's journey through the New York City Department of Ed school system, and she can talk about it as a parent, as a former teacher. I thank you, Courtney, for being here.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. And I see the question in the Q&A. I have a part of an answer for that, and then I think some resources that we can share too. So yes, as I mentioned, I am a New York City resident and have been raising my family here. And so you can see we started off in pre-K. assigned to a school that was relatively close to our home, which was good, which was PS 126 in Chinatown. And my son and my daughter both went there for pre-K, and then went up through middle school, and now they are in high school. And so I have I've experienced all the things, all of the applications to different schools, all of the waiting, and all of the stress of learning very new schools, sometimes in really old buildings that have a lot of infrastructure challenges in addition to learning about curriculum, and sometimes in really new buildings, which has been great. So, but those are my kids currently. My son's at LaGuardia High School, and he is a dancer, and my daughter's at Beacon High School, which is a consortium school. And interesting to talk about curriculum, because I would answer very low on that list. That was her first choice, but has a lot of school created curriculum, some of which I'm really happy with, and some of which I know less about. And it really struck me as we were starting this conversation that I knew a lot more about my kids' curriculum in elementary school when I had one teacher to ask and could really see work in the classroom, and how that was much more complicated as we got into middle school. And I had 5 different teachers to ask about the curriculum that they were teaching. And then in high school, where the teachers prefer the communication to be with the student, and I've had to do a lot more sleuthing on my own about what the curriculum is and make use of school websites and other tools. We have seen, especially since the onset of the pandemic, a lot of schools investing in increasingly digital materials. So it doesn't surprise me that someone asked about iReady. And iReady has lots of digital components, and we have reviewed iReady in math. And so if you, we can post the links to those reviews. We found lots of high quality aspects of those curriculum, but what we don't address is implementation. And so how a curriculum is used in the classroom is really where your questions are going to come in. So if you know about iReady, you're already one step ahead. Okay, I know they're using this. You can read a little bit more and learn about the curriculum so that you can tailor your questions more precisely. But then I've found a lot of success using the SLT, particularly in middle school, the school leadership team, as a way to elevate questions that I had around curriculum, because there are teacher representatives, parent representatives, and then the school principal. And then as a high school parent, our PTA actually gathers parent questions before every PTA meeting to give to school leadership and ask for responses. And so that's also been very, very successful in terms of figuring out, like, how's this really being used? What is a teacher being asked to do with it? What latitude do they have? And if you've got a neurodivergent learner, then what kinds of accommodations are the teachers trained? Like, what are they learning about to make sure that they can address every student's needs? And, across the board, like, how is the school ready to support your student? So really using some of those parent channels, hopefully they exist in your school, are a really good way. And I think just being persistent about learning about the curriculum, and then kind of going, okay, PTA, okay, school leadership team, okay, maybe direct conversation with the principal. And then if there are enough parents that have questions, hopefully you've gotten your questions answered as a partner. If not, there's always the superintendent's office. And if a group of parents go with really specific questions, then often the superintendent is great at helping to get those answered. So I think there are a lot of different ways, as long as you first are kind of tailoring your questions so that they know what specifically you're wondering about. So that's my family and my kids, and different ways that I've tried to stay involved. And I just know that the complexity as you get older, as the kids get older, really changes. School websites these days are they're still not very great, but they're often wealth of information. And so if you can get online, either on your mobile device or what you're using here, or even at the library, and go to your school's website, often they will have a curriculum overview. And so again, it gives you a place to start to ask a specific question, or to look on our site and say, oh, interesting, this is the curriculum they're using. Has EdReports done a review of this curriculum? Can I learn a little bit more? And then I can ask a question, that says, this says the books are of really high quality. I haven't seen my child bring any books home. Or I'm wondering about getting books in Spanish, or whatever else it is, so that you can ask really specific questions to follow up. Lauren, you want to go from here? enough of my kids.
Thanks, Courtney. I know, it's so much fun looking at your kids, but yeah, I guess we can move off of them. You know, what we're going to do now is we're going to do some Q&A. So I'm actually going to stop my screen share so that it's not, you don't just see this slide up. It'll make our faces a little bit bigger, but we can start talking about, we can get into some of the questions both through the chat, and please keep them coming in. And I think, you know, Gigi, you might have some as well. But actually, if I could start, Courtney.
Sure.
Can you share a little bit more about how New York, like school by school, New York City schools don't have the same curriculum? Like,
That's right.
Can you talk a little bit more about why that is?
So schools in New York City have what's called local control. You might have experienced that in lots of different ways, which means school principals have a lot of decision-making power. That can be really great for school communities because it means that they can address the individual needs of their school community without having to do exactly one thing put down upon them by the Department of Education. There are 1,800 schools in New York City. And so having that control school by school has been an important lever for parents and for school leaders, I think. But what it means is that when it comes down to curricular choices, schools have to have curriculum, as Lauren mentioned before, and they have to be able to share what that is. The city often recommends or incentivizes schools around curriculum, so they always have core curriculum choices in math and ELA, and increasingly in social studies and other subjects, where schools can opt in. That is good buying power. So if you're a school that's using your budget wisely, you can get a lower price on something that you are buying if the city's buying power is going behind that. The city uses usually a panel of teachers and other educators to choose those curricular materials. And a fairly high percentage of schools, sometimes up to 20%, have adopted those materials. And so you may find more commonality than not, especially in elementary school. But as you get into middle and high school, there's a lot more discretion. And again, principals have to demonstrate that they're using curriculum. They may get a waiver from the city to decide on something that is locally really works for their kids. If you have a consortium school, which is a school that doesn't do the Regents tests and uses a lot of performance-based assessments, or if you have another kind of special school that has a special angle around hospitality or around outside learning, they can use different curriculum. And so as a parent, it means you've got to ask a lot of questions about what the school is using and have them share that with parents. Curriculum night used to be in person. That was both good and bad, right? So even as a person who worked for the New York City Department of Education, sometimes I couldn't go to curriculum night because of work commitments. Now, I always get to see because those are recorded, even if I can't go to teacher presentations because the union voted that they can be remote. So I actually got a lot of information about my child's curriculum, not even going this year, but being able to watch a recording. And so I think using those times that are designated in the schools are really important. But schools have options from the city. You can see those options online at the city, at the New York City Department of Education website. Their adoption cycles, like how often they refresh those curriculum, about every 4 to 5 years that they put up new choices. So it's worth looking and asking. And again, other than that, schools they can get a waiver, they can do their own thing. And often that means they can tailor curriculum to the students in the community, which has a lot of benefits as well.
Yeah. Thank you. And Lighty just put a good question in the chat. This is such an important question. Do you find teachers sometimes resist curriculum, preferring homegrown creative approaches, or cherry picking various curriculums? And is this always a red flag?
That's such a good question. I mean, the short answer is it's not always a red flag. I would say it's maybe a yellow flag, which is that I don't find teachers are resistant to curriculum. I've never met a teacher, either while I was teaching as a school leader or now, that doesn't want to understand the scope and sequence and learning goals for their students. Sometimes teachers are more leery of a curriculum that says that it includes it all. Usually that's because they haven't had very good professional learning, tying back into Lauren's earlier comments, that they haven't been able to understand what's part of something that is bought, and so it feels overwhelming.
Mhm.
But then, yes, some teachers prefer to write their own curriculum or use something that they know that has what they consider to be a more creative approach. And sometimes that can be a really coherent, great scope and sequence of learning that has clear learning goals. Other times, it can be more of searching for a good pair of jeans every single night. And with a few questions to the teacher, you can usually tell whether they have a long-term learning plan for students or whether you get answers that are like, I decide day to day, I let the kids tell me where they want to go. Those kinds of answers, I would say, are red flags. But if you have a teacher that can show you clearly what they hope students will learn, how they're going to get there, what the time frame is, then you can really dig into what are the texts they're using, how do they know students are on grade level, and again, those detailed questions that'll give you more and more information.
Yeah. And Courtney, you said a word in there that's like one of my favorite words, which is coherence. And so what we're talking about is like there's coherence within the year. How do the lessons and units tie together, the activities tie together towards that learning goal for the year? Then there's also coherence looking as the call it vertical coherence. So how was grade one coherent with grade 2 and 3? And so you're seeing a path, because what we see for all subject areas, all content areas, is you're learning foundational skills. Call it in first grade. And those foundational skills are critical for second grade. And those are critical for third grade, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's another thing that we pay a lot of attention to, is how well are materials coherent year over year. And so when you do have homegrown materials, again, it's possible. It is 100% possible. And that would be another type of question that I would ask, is like, how does what, my child is learning, call it first grade again, how does that connect? How does that build coherence with what she'll be expected to learn and be able to do in second grade?
Yes, I also see another question in the chat from an attendee. She asks, how can one get access to school curriculum if their child doesn't yet go to that school? How can parents best assess which school to attend based on curriculum?
That's
Love
great.
it. Courtney, you want to start? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the internet is your friend to start with. So a lot of schools have a lot of curricular information online if you're digging around. If you're a middle or high school parent, there are quite a number, but there's some really good listservs. So there's a Parents of New York Teens listserv that exists if you Google, and it's a really good resource for posting questions. And so you can often find folks that are in different schools. And then, I mean, I think Inside Schools is a great place to get information and has a community of parents where you can ask questions. And again, get someone who is at that school. I found school tours in elementary school really highlighted curriculum more than I expected. And again, some of them have now gone to virtual tours or will have recordings of tours in a way that if you can't leave work to go to 5 different curriculum tours, there's a lot more available on the school websites. Parent coordinators are a really good resource, and usually their emails are listed on any school website. And so reaching out to them to ask where you might get curriculum information as a prospective parent, it requires some legwork, but I think there are ways to get that information so that you can make some decisions.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought up parent coordinators. That is not something that exists in districts throughout the country, but is a powerful resource for you as you are looking at schools, or even as your child's already there. So just wanted to double down on what Courtney is saying, is that that's a great place to start before you necessarily have relationships with the school's principals or APs or teachers.
Yes, and I just want to highlight that in New York City, you can go on My Schools. I put the link in the chat, and there they have a calendar of all school tours. Like, let's say you're looking for middle schools or high schools, or like I was looking for a kindergarten placement for my child. I looked at see if potential school had a tour, and I can see it. They have virtual options, they have in-person options, they have sort of like a hybrid thing going on too as well. So like Lauren mentioned, you can see like a recap of what was talked about during that live presentation. Sort of like this, like there's a recording available. Or like always, parent coordinators. Some of them are hesitant, but like if you pester them enough, you can always get sort of like a recap, or they'll tell you like, oh, look at our school website. So it's always good to reach out and sort of like email or even call the school, be like, oh, I want to know a little bit about school's curriculum. I'm debating on sending my child here, or I want to know a little bit more information about this, the math curriculum, about the LA curriculum. So those little like calls or like emails worth the effort, because you will get a response.
And Laura, a participant in today's webinar, just put into the chat that sometimes in schools' comprehensive education plan, that there's information on the school leadership team and there's information on curriculum. And that is, I don't know if I want to say more often than not, but that's up there, like on their website. And it's something that you can dig into, and you'll get to know more about the school, period. Not just its curriculum choice, but that is a really powerful way to understand how the school is thinking about all aspects of instruction and community. And as Courtney said in the chat too, those documents are dense. So, sit down with a cup of coffee, but it's worth it as you go through, because you really will learn so much about your school. Oh, okay. Now, next question, Lady asked about this idea of scripted. So do high quality curricula can typically embed choices? Courtney, could you talk a little bit more about what we look for when we're talking about high quality and student autonomy and choice?
Sure. Yeah, I think choice is an important component of a high quality curriculum, and you might see that in different ways in different curricula. So students might have, we talk about multiple representation sometimes, so different ways of answering questions, whether that's in an activity where students can choose a written response, or maybe they have the opportunity to do something in a small group, or maybe they're doing something by speaking, something oral. So looking at the curriculum and making sure that there are different ways that students can represent their answers. It's important, that variety, right? Not only for learners that might need to write down something before they speak, or have an easier time speaking and a more challenging time writing, but also so students get proficient at a variety of ways of interacting, so that they can have a high quality class discussion, and they can also write an essay. So as you're looking at what your child is bringing home and doing, or the way they talk about class, it should be more than just one way. And it also should be that teachers are looking out for the ways to really understand how each kid best expresses themselves. And so if you have, again, neurodivergent learners, learners with IEPs, any sort of specific need for your child, there should be accommodations that are suggested in a curriculum that really say, if you have a student who needs these supports, here's some ideas, here's a scaffold, here's a sheet for planning. Those types of things should be part of any high quality curriculum, as should lots of choices in how kids actually represent their learning.
Yeah. And another set of materials I was looking at recently at the high school ELA level, they had a common text. We call it an anchor text, a common text that every student was reading. I think in this case, it was like To Kill a Mockingbird. So every student's going to read that text. But then for the secondary texts and the other assignments, students were given a choice of what it was they were going to, read. And so they got to exercise choice within a common unit too, about like take their interests and apply their interests to their learning. And then that would show up, as Courtney was saying too, in the assessment and the assignments that they were given. So they were able to bring back the common experience from the full class and their independent work. And Light is asking, I will not speak to what a parent coordinator can do because I am not a parent coordinator, but I would love it if one of our parent coordinators. Can we make it? If anyone like raised their hand, could we bring them in?
Yes, we can. Is there a parent coordinator? If you're a parent coordinator, you can raise your hand. Now, ask to unmute. No takers. It's okay. You're probably in lunch break.
You want me to talk? This is Leidy from Inside Schools. Parent coordinators are like your first person you can reach out to. Say you're brand new to the New York City Public Schools. We have parent coordinator emails on every school page on our website, and you can just email them and ask your questions. They often plan workshops, educational and fun workshops for families. They do so many things. I'm going to get nervous and go blank. Parent coordinators. Oh, there's Natalie. Creating a welcoming school environment for parents, working with the principal to address parent issues and concerns, conducting outreach to engage parents in children's education. They are amazing. And their job is, I think, rather creative because they're creating community all the time. They're welcoming every person. They're making sure things are accessible, signage. Sometimes there's a parents' room that people can gather in. So that's my best stab at it. Parent coordinators, keep putting your role in the chat.
One of them mentioned we are their nurse and everything else. Yes.
And I think one of the reasons we're so appreciative of the work of parent coordinators do is like schools can be an intimidating place, particularly for parents who might not have had maybe they had interrupted schooling themselves, or maybe they didn't have a great education experience. It can be intimidating and hard to know how to get in and like engage with the community and ask questions and do all the things that you want to do to support your child. And so when it comes to curriculum, we find that it can even be an even more intimidating topic. So like, you don't need to become an algebra or calculus expert to engage with your child's curriculum, right? It's about asking the right questions and knowing how well, teacher understands her material, how like the expectations for your child's like future college or career, like how is that built into the skills that your child's going to be learning that year? Again, you don't have to now become a calculus student yourself in order to do so. And that's actually something pretty powerful that curriculum can do. So if you have a common set of materials, it's like a new language. It's an entry point for conversation that you can now have with the teacher. So it's, oh, I see we're using this product. I looked up this product. It seems to be, rated highly. What do you like about it? So I really do think it's a productive and powerful way to build relationships around academics with your child's school.
And I guess I want to branch out, and I'm going to ask another question to Courtney about multilingual learners. I hear in the chat there's a bilingual parent coordinator in the Bronx. I want to know like what supports are available from the district for caregivers of students learning English, or even how do I know if there are instructional materials that support students who are English language learners?
Yeah, it's so important. I'm so glad that you're a bilingual parent coordinator, Natalie. It's a really important job and important to be able to connect families to one another, right? Because it's even more, those barriers are really challenging sometimes for families. In our instructional materials reviews, we talk about what supports there are for parents and families. So if you're looking at any curricula that we have, we do not have our reviews translated online. But if you are a person who is helping a family who has a multilingual learner student, or they themselves are looking for supports, you can see whether or not some of those supports exist within the curriculum. And so we write about translated letters for families, other suggestions that are part of the materials that might help connect to families. And then we also share information that is in the materials to support multilingual learner students. But this is the place not to pile it all on the parent coordinators as the nurse and everything else, but having that in-school connection where you can ask the specific question about, my student is learning English. How are they being supported to do grade level work? And then each of the borough offices are often a really good resource. And so you may find yourself going for more of the district resources that exist within the New York City Public Schools. In addition to the school resources, we do have a lot of supports in the city for bilingual families, multilingual families, and also for multilingual learner students. And so finding those, accessing those through school, I think the parent coordinator is a really great first start. Sometimes a school, if large enough, will have, I think they're still called bilingual coordinators, but they will have someone on staff specifically to work with classrooms that are the multilingual learner students coming in. So they know those families, they're figuring out when they're in the classrooms, where their level is, how they're moving through the school. But your staff at the school is probably your best first look. And then if you are looking at our materials in our third section around usability, we definitely have things that support both multilingual learners and connecting with families.
Yeah, like one of our indicators or criterion is treats home language as an asset. Like, how do materials support the classroom to teach, right? To treat home language as an asset, not as like a deficiency. Like that should be explicitly built into the curriculum that you're able to build. And Courtney, you mentioned one piece, I just want to say it again, is that making sure that students who are, where English is not their primary or first language, that they're still like learning the skills and knowledge they need to be on track for being college and career ready. Like, that is something we look for, is that the content itself is still really high quality, and that there are more scaffolds or accommodations or instructional approaches to help the student, but they're not being left behind because they are learning the English language.
Lady, I'll answer your question. I'll ignore parts of it, but I will say, I think we are really happy to see that schools who have realized that their curriculum doesn't address what we would call foundational skills in reading. So phonics is a part of that. There's also parts of that are around like speaking and listening words and word sounds that are really an important part of learning to read. And so we're really happy that schools and districts who understand that their curriculum are missing those things are adding those to the curriculum. We know that those are essential for kids to learn how to read. And so we have what we call foundational skills reviews. We also break down exactly what that looks like in our tools. So if you look at how we review and what we use to review, you can learn maybe more than you ever thought you wanted to know about early literacy that follows the science of reading. So the science of how kids learn how to read. Is it enough? It depends on what they're doing. So I think that, really integrating foundational skills and how to learn how to read alongside a really rich experience with texts. Libraries are so important in schools. Classroom libraries are really important, so that those things have to be together. And it's really important to just understand what's happening in the classroom, to ask about the science of reading, and to ask about the books that kids are reading. So I can't really say if it's enough, but I'm certainly glad that they are adding phonics and other foundational skills when they realize there's a deficiency.
Yeah. And I'll just say one more piece on that. Like, it gets harder and harder, going back to that coherence word that we talked about earlier. It gets harder and harder to have coherence, not just from a teacher's perspective, but from a student's perspective. if you're, as you introduce more and more products and try to fit them all together into like a common experience and a quality learning experience. So I think that is like, is it possible? 100%. Is it something that requires extra care and attention? 100%. And when we think about all these curricular decisions from the perspective of a child and a student, like, how do we make sure that she is getting the best experience and is understanding from the phonics to the other like different components of a strong ELA curriculum, that it feels really seamless for her. Man, this has been fun. I like the questions have been great. I appreciate the chats in the side. I appreciate knowing that we have a lot of parent coordinators in the house. I see we only have like another couple of minutes. I would like to go back to sharing my screen to wrap us up with a ton of appreciation for our hosts here at Inside Schools today and the work that they do. So this is us. We're EdReports, edreports.org. You can find our information there. You can find us and more information about us on our website. Inside Schools. Leidy or Gigi, do you just want to share a little bit more about you and what people should look for next in terms of this recording and how you'll get it out to the world?
If Lady wants to speak, I will speak. So we're Inside Schools. We will send a follow-up with all the links that you're seeing in the chat from Jana, the handful. So don't worry if you're scrolling up and down to save everything right now. We will send you guys all the links, that are sort of like answers to certain questions. There will be a recording available that will be sent out in a follow-up as well, along with any other answers to